After a historic Cyprus visit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Canada's Kananaskis to attend the G7 summit. At the summit, the Prime Minister will address the G7 outreach session and exchange views with leaders of G7 countries on crucial global issues, including energy security, technology and innovation. India is not a formal member of the G7, but it is regularly invited to attend its summits, reflecting India's growing influence on the world stage. The G7 is an informal grouping of the world's leading advanced economies, including France, USA, the UK, Germany, Japan, Italy, Canada, and the EU. Now, India has frequently been invited as a guest nation, receiving its first G7 invitation way back in 2003. It formally joined the G8+5 dialogue in 2008 and became a key participant in the G7 outreach after Russia's expulsion. To date, India has been invited 11 times to G7 summits and has been a consistent guest since 2019. Prime Minister Modi has attended the last 5 G7 meetings, reflecting India's growing role on the world stage. The Prime Minister was invited to attend the summit by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and this has signaled Canada's willingness to repair ties. Remember, the relations between the two countries had deteriorated during Justin Trudeau's tenure. So here's why the Prime Minister's visit to Canada matters. The first and the most important aspect is that it's an opportunity to reset the India-Canada ties. Secondly, the relationship had hit a nadir under Justin Trudeau, but there's a new Prime Minister there now. Trudeau has alleged India's link as far as Niger's killing is concerned. Under Carney, both are looking to rebuild relations. India has been invited in such a situation despite not being a G7 member. Remember, there's no compulsion for Canada to actually do that. It also reflects India's growing importance in the world. New Delhi is Ottawa's 10th largest trading partner, apart from the fact that, of course, there's a huge Indian diaspora that lives in Canada as well. Now, Prime Minister Modi is also expected to hold several bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the summit. These bilateral meetings include India and Canada that are expected to take place at 4:10 a.m. IST. That is about a little over 5 hours from now. The Prime Minister is going to be meeting with Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister. India and Germany, this is going to be Prime Minister Modi with Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor. There's also India and Ukraine's bilateral meeting, where the Prime Minister will be meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. India and Italy's bilateral meeting, where Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, will be meeting PM Modi. Now, some big breaking news coming in at the moment. Sources are telling Times now that India has proposed the name of Dinesh Patnaik as the next High Commissioner to Ottawa. The proposals with the Canadian government, and Canada is also likely to send a new High Commissioner to New Delhi at the earliest. Let me quickly take this across to my colleague Srinjoy Chaudhary, who's with us here in the studio. Srinjoy, that's a big one, because ahead of that big bilateral meeting, this is clearly the sign of a reset and a thaw as far as India and Canada relations are concerned.
Yes, Madhav. The agreement is already with Ottawa. The Canadian government is looking at Dinesh Patnaik's the proposal, and it's likely to agree to it very shortly. Now, that is a clear sign that these things will improve vis-a-vis India and Canada, because one thing has got stuck over these last few months, and is this relates to visas. Hundreds and hundreds of Indians are going to Canada or are keen to go to Canada. One, of course, they want to study there. A lot of people want to move there permanently as permanent residents. There are enough people who want to go there for business. Thirdly, very importantly, there are people who have family there. Now, it's important for them to get visas to meet family members. Now, all of that has got stuck. And one reason being attributed, of course, is this huge political problem between these two countries. But the fact that you don't have high commissioners, there doesn't seem to be any political interest. But now, if there is a thaw, then these things, the people-to-people relations, will actually improve enormously.
Absolutely. So just stay with us. Yeah, I'm going to come back to you on the implications of all of this as well. But let me quickly open this up and bring in our guests as well.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, Kamal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, continues on our show. We also have Kushal Mehra, author, joining us. We have with us Veena Najibullah, who's the Vice President of Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, joining us on the show. With us also is Noah Weisbord, who's an author and Associate Professor at McGill University. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kushal Mehra, coming to you first. I'm told that you're actually at the media venue as far as the G7 summit is concerned. And what's very interesting, as my colleague Srinjoy was bringing out, is that this could possibly look at, as far as a bilateral meeting between Prime Ministers Modi as well as Kani, is that could lead to an eventual thaw as far as the relations between the two countries, which have had a huge downturn in recent years.
Good evening, Madhav. The line that I'm taking as far as India and Canada is concerned is cautious optimism. We have to be optimistic because there are two baselines as far as India-Canada relations are concerned, right? There is a baseline of Justin Trudeau, so even me swatting a fly is better than that. And then there's a baseline of Prime Minister Harper, which should be the standardized baseline. So from the Justin Trudeau baseline, things are better. We should be cautious. Though, as far as the Indian perspective is concerned, from Prime Minister Harper's, we're not there yet. So let's see which one we achieve first. We are definitely ahead of the Justin Trudeau baseline. So the things are moving in the right direction. I think Prime Minister Carney has done all the right things that are supposed to be done in mature democracies. And I was just listening to you talking about the high commissioners too. If the news, because I've not been able to, I was just following the other bits, so I was not able to follow that bit. But if that is true, that is a really welcome move, and I think we're making all the taking all the right steps as far as India, Canada are concerned as of now. Those would be my opening remarks.
Right. Veena Najibullah, would you like to comment on that? Cautious optimism, says Kushal Mehra. Are you hopeful that things would perhaps be normalized sooner rather than later, given the fact that the diplomatic ties are expected to, at least with the announcements of the high commissioners, expected to be perhaps normalized, and a lot of the things, the people-to-people contact, the visas, etc., will all flow from here?
Yes, good morning from Vancouver. Thank you so much for the invitation. I would echo your guest's view that this is an important moment and it signals a potential reset in the relationship. But I think we have to be also realistic that the road for rebuilding this relationship, rebuilding trust, is going to be a long one. But this is an important first step. We will have the meeting bilaterally also between the two leaders this afternoon. We'll see whether they'll signal that they're reinstating high commissioners. We'll see whether there's a signal about the economic and trade relations, whether there will be renewal of those discussions as well. And then I think we'll have to see this meeting kind of as a lead up to what's going to happen at the G20 in September. So we have a few months to really put in place, follow up things, and to see whether or not the relationship, in fact, can be stabilized.
Absolutely. And let me bring in Kamal Sibal on that. Mr. Sibal, of course, from the kind of positions that Justin Trudeau had taken, obviously there's a markedly different approach when it comes to Mr. Carney. But the question is this, that you still have, for instance, security agencies referring to quote-unquote foreign interference. We all know what's been stated as far as the entire Niger killing episode is concerned. How do you think that the two countries will be able to tide over that?
I think it will be a very slow process. We've not mentioned the big problem that we have on the ground, which is the Khalistani activity, which continues, and you've seen the kind of demonstrations that have taken place. Now, obviously, this is a fringe element in a way, but nevertheless, these people exercise a lot of political influence within Canada. Now, if they didn't have that kind of political influence with all the parties, including the Conservatives, Mr. Poilievre was also wooing them before the elections, then they would have been able to actually do something about them. But they haven't. And this continues right till yesterday when they had all these terrible, terrible demonstrations against Prime Minister Modi. So this is deeply embedded into now the Canadian political system. Now, how they get rid of this poison, how soon they can get rid of it, will be a challenge for Canada. With regard to the invitation to Prime Minister to visit G7, we should not look upon it as a bilateral invitation. I think, in a sense, Mark Carney was, in a sense, compelled to invite the Prime Minister despite problems at home, because leaving out an invitation to Modi, who has attended so many summits in the past, would have meant that Canada is putting its bilateral ties with India in a larger context of the G7, where all the other leaders have very close ties with India and want to expand ties with India. And this has a bearing on the standing and the reputation and the image of the G7 as such. So Carney has made the right decision, and he's made an opening. And there will be, as was said earlier, a slow process of reconciliation. Now, with regard to visas and everything that you mentioned, it's not going to happen simply because the high commissioners have been appointed. So many diplomats were expelled on both sides. Then they have to return to their positions. That will have to be based on intensive negotiations about how we're going to manage this Khalistani, criminal, violent, terrorist activity in Canada. They threaten our high commissioners, they threaten our leaders. That is going to continue. A lot of responsibility lies on the shoulders of Canada, but I welcome the fact that a kind of a thaw has occurred, and one can build on that. And I think what we can actually do is to concentrate in the first instance on trade and those kind of ties, which are mutually beneficial, and focus on that, and not allow that to be conditioned by a resolution of the larger issue with regard to the Canadian Sikh extremists.
Absolutely. In fact, Noah Wisbert, if I can bring you in on this, the larger question from the Indian perspective is this, that you have individuals who are accused of very, very heinous crimes, even killing, so on and so forth, who are very much within Canadian jurisdiction, and the kind of positions that have been taken by these individuals who threaten Indian diplomats. We've seen those posters out there, have made all sorts of statements, extremely objectionable ones as far as Indian leaders are concerned, both current and past. In a situation like that, India's expectation would be that the current regime at least prevents them from carrying out these kind of protests, some of which have even turned violent in the past. And that's certainly something that no democracy can afford. Noah.
The larger relationship between Modi and Carney is the most important thing here. So once the leaders develop a modicum of trust and develop a working relationship, then these other issues that are much more sensitive can be worked out. So they're doing exactly the right thing by meeting face-to-face, focusing on trade, focusing on the long ties between Canada and India. I think India has one of our largest expat populations out of anybody, way larger than any Sikh or Khalistani separatist movement. The Indian population is far more influential in Canadian politics than most others. There's more Indian expats in Canada than Chinese even. So you should not underestimate the amount of importance and appreciation Canada has for the Indian expat community. And I think that probably Modi will feel that when he speaks with Carney, who's a very knowledgeable and pragmatic leader. I think things are off to a good start.
Right. Srinjoy, what are we looking at in terms of, how the relationship goes on from here on? Of course, important that you spoke about, the high commissioners, coming in. But beyond that, it is going to be quite a challenge, as Mr. Kabul Sibal was detailing. There are many issues of concern that both countries perhaps has, and India certainly would like to see some action, particularly on those individuals who support the idea of Khalistan.
Yeah. See, they are terrorists. India has called them terrorists, and rightly too. And India expects and India hopes that some action will be taken against these Khalistanis. There are people who even today, not only do they do the things that they do in Canada, they call up Indian officers, Indian officials, and threaten them even today. Now, that's not something India would like. It's not something India would want. And India would want serious action against these people. That's one, of course. That's a very critical issue. But I imagine that would happen over a period of time. This is something India wants. This is something India hopes Canada will help India with. Ideally, all these guys that India wants, they should be put on a plane and sent back to India. And all of them are wanted in India for a variety of crimes, and they can be dealt with. But of course, that's a very long way off if that happens at all. But more importantly, there are, as has been said before, there are thousands and thousands of Indians there. Now, many have families here. At least it would be nicer if these families can get together.
Okay.
And that's very important.
Let me bring
Economic issues are also very important.
Absolutely.
All of this has to be sorted out, particularly the new Prime Minister has a lot of economics behind him. He was governor of the Bank of England.
But let me come to the first point that you made. And Veena Rajibullah, what are the odds of that actually happening? Because India certainly would like to see these individuals who are designated as terrorists be brought to justice. Is that something that Canada is likely to allow, at least in the interest of better ties between the two countries?
Look, there are serious national security concerns on both sides. And I think Canada and India need to revive law enforcement cooperation. We have different mechanisms. We have a working group countering terrorism and extremist violence. We have an MOU on the same issue signed in 2018. So I think it would be important to see accountability and justice on the cases that Canada has put forward, certainly the Newshour case, but others as well. It's also important for Canada to take India's national security concerns vis-a-vis the Khalistani issue seriously. So I think what we're looking at here is the need to rebuild trust, to have confidence building measures on the part of law enforcement on both sides, to start the process of dialogue and cooperation. It won't happen overnight. With respect to these other cases, just a final word, we need to follow extradition process. It's not just a matter of handing people over. There are rules and regulations, and as long as we can follow
Kushal's
them,
hand is going up and we're almost out of time. Kushal, quick 20-second response, please.
Madhav, Canadians have mastered the art of foreign interference. My question to every single Canadian is, give me a working definition of what foreign interference is. Foreign interference in Canada is like Schrodinger's cat. It is and it is not. Where it should be, it's never discussed. Where it is not, it is always discussed. NIA has given detailed dossiers to Canada and every other country in the world. They seem to work every time for every other country in the world, but the moment it comes to Canada, Canada seems to come up with unique definitions. These are just excuses. Are we trying to say that Hardeep Singh Nijjar and all the other figures in the past did not have accurate documentation about these things? Like I said, always remember, performative outrage is the raison d'etre of Canadian politics.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Kawal Sibal, Kushal Behra, Veena Rajibullah, Noah Weisbert, and my colleague Srinjoy Chaudhary. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening.